Howdy folks, welcome back to the Lawrence Jameson Show, the Shadespire Lore Edition, or Fluff if you want to call it. The Curse of Shadespire. Many grand cities arose in the age of myth, only to be sundered by rampaging armies and the wills of terrifying gods. Few were more glorious than Shadespire, the city amongst the dunes, and fewer still fell so completely and with such rapidity. Shadespire once stood as a shining metropolis, a beacon of power and prosperity in the grim and withered realm of death. Its glass towers glistened with precious stones of every hue, casting iridescent reflections across the surrounding desert of bones. It is now a cold and desiccated husk, stripped of its luster and utterly cursed. Its once magnificent spires are little more than crumbling protrusions that claw lifelessly at the bleak sky, while its outer districts are slowly subsumed by the encroaching skeletal dunes that are blown ever inwards. The city has all but faded from memory, and those few who have heard the tales of its former glory speak of it only in fearful whispers. The very name of Shadespire is a curse, and is synonymous with damnation. In the age of myth, the founders of Shadespire set out to create a waypoint in the middle of the Desert of Bones, a safe haven for travelers and merchants on the treacherous journey between distant realm gates. The enormous desert was anathema to life, as the perilous gust from the wailing wind would strip flesh from bone and carry the etheric essence of a body away to the silent waste. But amidst the shifting mountains of lifeless remains, the oasis of souls was found. This twisting network of canyons cut deep into the compacted bone sediment beneath the dunes, descending further into the darkness than those who had discovered it dared venture. They knew not what had formed this plunging abyss, but the wisest amongst them believed it to be a locust through which the flowing energies of Shyish converged. Perhaps the morbid ley lines canceled each other out at this point, preventing the death-soaked earth from coalescing. Or perhaps the conflict of grim magic caused the realm itself to waste away here under the unbearable weight of moribund energy. Whatever its nature, shelter was found within the many recesses of the oasis, as was water in stubborn patches of Shyish's anemic vegetation. As the first weary vagabonds explored the caves further, they found their spirits invigorated, bolstered against the surrounding lifelessness when in the presence of the inky black ores that ran in seams through the cavern. It was from this place of respite that the first shanties and stores of Shadespire arose. A waypoint quickly became a town, which then became a bustling hub of commerce and culture, with humans, elves, Duarden from every corner of the realms passing through its gates. Massive towers were built at the center of the burgeoning city, which could be seen far off into the surrounding barrens. The wonders of distant lands were brought to Shadespire to be traded, and sharp-eyed collectors scoured its markets for squares of esoteric tomes of knowledge and curiosities imbued with magic. The weaponry and spellcraft of 1,000 kingdoms was brought inside the city walls, and here it was combined, adapted, and refined to produce artifacts of unequaled power. The ingenious creators who were able to craft such objects were rewarded with riches and vaunted in Shadespire's high courts. A ruling elite emerged known as the Cataphragnes, and their glory continued to expand with their boundless innovation. All paid tithes to the Cataphragnes for the privilege of entering their city, and emperors and warlord alike bowed in deference to their might, entreating them for tools to help conquer new lands. The Cataphragnes' greatest work was the crafting of glass made from the dark ores within the Oasis of Souls. Shade glass, as they called it, could capture the essence of one's being at the point of death, before the soul seeped away to the underworlds. With shade glass, the knowledge and memories of the dying could be preserved, and the cataphragms were able to live beyond their mortal years as pure thought, unshackled from their aging bodies. Exquisitely crafted mirrors and illuminated panes were given places of prominence throughout the city, all of which were connected by the crystalline monument known as the Fane Way, the nexus through which all soul energy passed. The cataphragms, preserved within their prisms, communed with one another and oversaw their city, and together they reveled in the powers that they had mastered. In the middle of a lifeless wasteland, in the amethyst realm itself, they had conquered death, and in doing so, they roused the undying wrath of Nagash. Over the centuries, the cataphragms begin to further unlock the secrets of shade glass, even inventing artifacts that would allow the living to enter the Faneway mirror, the gleaming nexus that linked every fragment of shade glass in the city, and interact with their ancestors. Further remarkable inventions followed. The city's outer walls were suffused with the spirits of elite warriors who had fallen in battle, an eternal watch against the manifold threats of the surrounding desert of bones. Treasures were produced that were magically linked to the Faneway, so that a grieving relative might converse with their lost loved one via an enchanted amulet or brooch. Shade glass golems were created, given motion by the soul essence of loyal retainers who continued to serve their masters even in death. From the cold stillness of the underworlds, the great necromancer Nagash, god of the dead, cast his spiteful gaze upon Shadespire. For too long had the cataphragms received tributes from others, while at the same time denying Nagash his rightful tithe of souls. This was an insult which could not be borne, and the god weaved a hateful spell, drawing upon the power of shade glass that was sown throughout the city. The inhabitants of Shadespire would not simply be executed for their heinous debt. For those who had tried to deny death, there would be a far greater punishment. As Nagash unleashed his sorcery, the soul of Shadespire was severed from reality. Every living creature within the city was siphoned into oblivion, leaving no trace of their existence save for the desolate ruin they once called home. Yet to simply destroy the city and drag its inhabitants to the underworlds seemed to Nagash an insufficient punishment. Instead, the great necromancer wove a ritual that drew upon the mysterious powers of the city's shade gas constructions, siphoning away the light and glory of Shadespire and creating a twisted reflection of its former splendor. Shadespire was trapped halfway between Ulgu, the realm of shadows, and Haish, the realm of light. Bound within this dark reflection, refracted between these two diametrically opposed realms, the souls of the fallen could never escape the mirrored city and make the journey to the underworlds. None within its walls would be granted the release of death. Nagash would forever deny them that gift. When the city was swept into shadow by the magic of Nagash, many objects of power were destroyed or warped by the power of the Lord of Undeath's magic. The Faneway itself was shattered into 1,000 fragments, each shard scattered about the mirrored city. With the nexus of the soul relay broken, no soul could leave the nightmarish prison that held them captive. For thousands of years, the cataphragms sought to undo the curse of Shadespire. They hypothesized that recovering artifacts of pure shade glass and utilizing them to restore the great Faneway mirror might break Nagash's spell. But trapped as they were within their soul-storing prisons, they could not carry out this task themselves. At first they attempted to utilize their subjects, the citizens of Shadespire, but madness and paranoia swiftly overcame these unfortunate souls. It seemed as though the city itself was warping and shifting with every passing hour, hide its secrets away behind illusory walls and impossibly dimensioned chambers. No sooner was a precious shade glass treasure recovered than another was lost, and the city's streets shattered and reformed, or a great stairway shifted, sending doomed souls tumbling away into darkness. Minds destroyed by this maddening existence, souls trapped within the decaying bodies, the people of Shadespire shuffled and groaned in the dark corners of the city. They cursed the torture of their eternal existence, as both their hope and their flesh slowly withered and rotted away. Worse still, regions of the city were slowly morphing under the will of Nagash. The image of the great necromancer would appear half glimpsed in a reflection, or slowly form in the architecture of a great tower, his pitiless gaze further tormenting those who had defied his will. Many were driven to terrified insanity, blinding themselves with shards of glass so they could not look upon his dread visage. Others turned to worshipping Nagash and claimed great sections of Shadespire as their own, guarding their territory with a ruthless zeal, believing that only by petitioning the god of death for forgiveness could they absolve themselves of their prideful sins. They raised monuments and shrines in his honor. They claimed all shade glass relics as the property of Nagash and sequestered those they recovered with great sepulchres of bone and wasting flesh, built from the still conscious bodies of heathens and intruders. When the soul of Shadespire was stolen by Nagash, those kingdoms that had traded with the desert city cowered in fear, wondering if the great necromancer's wrath would also fall upon their territories. Returning envoys who had left Shadespire before its demise were slaughtered upon reaching their homelands, a precaution lest they carried with them a portion of the god's curse. Tomes of lore concerning the city were put to the torch, and to utter its name was deemed a blasphemy, an affront to Nagash that was punishable by a torturous death. Shadespire and the Cataphragms were spoken of no more, and in time both ebbed into legend. Though forgotten and reduced to a hollow skeleton of the metropolis it once was, Shadespire still lies where it died in the desert. The abundant treasures that have been collected by the city's living inhabitants for countless generations remain untouched. Within its mausolean halls lies the wealth of untold empires, paid to the Cataphragms to procure but a modicum of their profound wisdom. Gemstones gouged from mines in Ashai, and gold ingots from the hills of Shimon sit nestled amongst piles of gathering bone dust. The works of master artisans are scattered haphazardly throughout the buildings that have thus far withstood the erosion of malevolent gales. Even in the poorer suburbs and the outright slums, small ensorcelled trinkets sit on tables in the gaunt abodes that have not yet been buried under the roving mountains of desiccated remains. So plentiful were these riches during Shadespire's ascendancy that they distracted the roaming eyes of the city's many supplicants from the true treasures that lay secreted beneath the surface. The greatest creations of the Cataphragms still reside in the hidden chambers carved into the osseous bedrock, sealed beneath ornate cogwork doors that bar entry to those who do not know their secrets. Libraries of the arcane lie behind lock and key, their shelves packed with tomes of lore harvested from the greatest scholars of the realms. Unnavigable labyrinths lead to vast alchemical laboratories that, despite the passage of time, still hum with the slowly bleeding power of transmuted metals. In the sprawling outer districts, below watch houses that dot the barren streets, weapons engraved with complex runes line the racks of secure armories, their innate magic shielding them from the gnawing effects of corrosion. No treasure was more precious than the knowledge of shade glass. The encrypted tomes that record the process of its crafting and the implements with which it was fashioned are still guarded by the deadliest designs of the Cataphragms. The fractal passages that were built to access the shade glass foundries deep within the Oasis of Souls confound those without knowledge of their construction. Elaborate traps set into the joins of seemingly mundane masonry, still waiting to be sprung, having lost none of their lethal potency over the passing centuries. Sorcerous wards and golems laced with veins of Ur-gold wait in silence to be activated by those who do not have the permission of their creators to pass. The cataphragms went to great lengths to protect their most sacred discovery, and though they kept its secrets, the damnation they incurred was shared with all of Shadespire. For more than 1,000 years, the shadow-cloaked ruins of Shadespire lay dormant, a malevolent scar in the center of a vast desert of bones. During much of that time, there were few fresh victims of the city's terrible curse. Travelers seldom ventured across the deadly parching waste to reach the city, as often warded away by the lethal storms that racked its bone-dust dunes as by the dark stories that had sprung up around the place. Yet some were brave or foolish enough to stray within the borders of the cursed city, and those fortunate few who returned brought back priceless treasures and forbidden knowledge, as well as rumors of haunted mirrors, nightmarish illusions, and other strange tales. Soon, avaricious eyes were drawn to Shadespire, for the curse of Nagash had passed into myth, and the realms are filled with desperate souls who would gladly risk damnation in search of power. Worshippers of the foul gods and bands of savage, war-loving orcs fought bloody skirmishes at the city gates, and rat-like skavens skittered through the shadows, scrabbling for relics and treasures to take back to their filth-strewn lairs. Only the determined survived the long trek through the barren dunes. Scouts and warriors set out in small parties, for the attrition the Desert of Bones would wreak upon an entire army would be too devastating for any general to bear. There are no charts to guide the journeys across the vast wastes. What maps did exist were destroyed long ago, either burned for the fear that they carried the taint of Nagash's curse, or torn to shreds by the barbaric followers of the ruinous powers. After months amidst the skeletizing vortexes of the wailing wind, the hardy, the guileful, and the lucky approached Shadespire. Inside the ancient walls, there is even greater peril. Decrepit streets give way to yawning chasms under heavy footfalls, and sepulchral buildings collapse on passers-by without warning as their brittle bone mortar finally succumbs to the erosion of time. Those who are separated from their party are cut down in the deadly lattice of traps laid down by the cataphragms, or are drowned by the unseen dark forces that still haunt every corner of the city. By far the greatest threats to a warband are others who have come to Shadespire seeking the same arcane rewards. Every echoing alley is a perfect site for ambush, and every desolate market square a potential battlefield. Roving mobs of mortals, beasts, and daemons prowl the wrecked city like scavengers picking clean a colossal corpse. Each is prepared to fight to the last, and should they secure the power they seek, then their enemies will tremble before them, both in Shadespire and in the wars of the mortal realms. The ruins of Shadespire became a subject of particular interest to the mighty god king Sigmar, whose elite champions, the Stormcast Eternals, were deployed in a great crusade against the forces of the Chaos Gods, primordial entities who sought to despoil the mortal realms. His champions had suffered greatly during the Long War, and though each was effectively immortal, the mysterious process of reforging that the fallen went through upon death had taken a worrying toll. Every time a warrior was remade, they lost a part of themselves, gradually shedding the vestiges of their humanity, becoming emotionless and uncompromising. The changes wrought by the reforging process manifested themselves in a myriad of unsettling ways, and those storm hosts who had seen constant battle were particularly affected. Long had the God King known of the rumors surrounding the lost Shadespire, where once the souls of the dead had been preserved in time. If shade glass could perform such miracles, might it not also be of use in his quest to salve the trauma that ran rife through his armies? Seeking to learn more regarding the properties of this mysterious substance and the truth of the lost city, the God King sent forth a force of Stormcast Eternals from the noble Hammers of Sigmar, with orders to investigate the time-weathered skeleton of Shadespire. Several detachments from this first and most honored storm host, including formations of shield-bearing liberators and bands of elite vanguard hunters, made camp at the edge of the ruins. From there they launched patrols deep into the depths of the narrow, gloomy streets. Within, the warriors had to contend not only with packs of Skaven and Auric looters who fell upon the intruders with vicious glee, but also frenzied worshippers of Khorne, god of slaughter, who had tracked the Stormcast Eternals to the border of the cursed city and now sought once more to wet the earth with the blood of their hated enemies. These initial engagements were brutal, but after much blood was spilled, the Hammers of Sigmar began to push their enemies back, scattering them to the shadows. It was then that something strange began to occur. Having secured key areas of control within the city's borders, Stormcast patrols began to report that isolated members of their number had seemingly disappeared into thin air, with no bodies or bloodstains left behind to suggest a struggle, and no burst of celestial lightning to indicate that the soul of a fallen Stormcast was making the long journey back to Izerham, seat of Sigmar's empire, for reforging. Whispers began to fill the warriors' ears, promises of great glory and threats of damnation, echoes of laughter and tormented screams. Some glimpsed half-formed images in the shards of glass that littered the ground, pleading faces racked with anguish, lost comrades beset by hordes of the living dead, and looming above it all, a skeletal visage, eyes blazing with a hateful balefire. When all attempts to find the absent warriors failed, the Hammers of Sigmar reluctantly fell back to their defensive positions on the edge of Shadespire. Word was sent back to Azerheim of the evil that they had unearthed. Something had taken their battle-kin, something ancient and filled with malice. Whatever had happened to their missing comrades, for now they were on their own. Putrid blood dripped from the grand blade of Liberator Prime's severed Steelheart as the remaining vermin folk scurried off into the rubble-strewn alleys. Turning, he saw that all of his fellow Stormcast Eternals were still standing. Only 6 of their chamber had come to Shadespire, but they were dauntless warriors all. With a silent nod from their leader, Night Quester Cantor Gloryborn, Severn, and the others fell into step. There was little time to dwell on victories, and there would be many more battles as they searched the sprawling crypt of a city. But as Severn passed the fetid corpse of a Skaven priest he had just bisected, he spied a glittering shard of dark glass clutched in the rat man's lifeless claw. He stooped lower to examine the jewel-like object. Its blackness was impenetrable, as deep and as cold as a lifeless ocean. Reaching down, he let his armored finger rest upon its surface and felt the curious resonance deep within his being. Faces flittered across the facets. Some of these he thought he recognized from a life long ago. Others were strange and contorted, as though crying out in agony. This was Shadeglass, and the power it held was the reason they had been sent to the cursed city. The warriors under the command of Liberator Prime's Severin Steelheart and the grizzled hunters led by Hunter Prime Sanson Farstrider were part of a detachment sent to Shadespire to investigate potential cures for this ailment. Now they found themselves trapped, separated from their kin and from each other, with only the whispers of the dead to guide them home. The bloodbound are mortal warriors who have sworn themselves to Khorne, god of carnage and slaughter. Blinded by battle madness, lost to the exultant sensations of combat, they care for nothing but the kill. Gathered together in vast war hordes, they maraud across the realms, butchering and despoiling in the name of their dark master. Blood reavers, such as the band led by the brutal killer known as Garrick Gorebeard, are frenzied cannibals, mortals whose dark excesses have drawn them ever further into the thrall of the blood god. They eschew heavy armor, preferring to feel the blood spatter across their chests, and chase their prey as tirelessly as hunting wolves. Blood warriors are towering plate-armored killers who have taken the first steps down the path toward demonic ascension. A life of constant war has forged them into mighty champions of ruin, whose unquenchable lust for slaughter drives them ever onward in search of the next battle. The fiend Magor Red Hand leads his blood warriors through the mirrored city, tracking the hated Stormcast Eternals with the aid of his loyal fleshhound Riptooth. Should they fall upon their quarry, they will tear them apart, and with the blood of the fallen they will defile the mirrored city so utterly that Khorne's eye will be drawn to this damned place and to the glory tributes of his loyal servants. Oryx are savage, muscle-brown creatures who live for the crash and crunch of battle. Ironjaws are the mightiest of their number, clad in thick plates of rusted metal and wielding huge jagged weapons forged from the same. They are a constant threat across the mortal realms, sweeping across the earth in great hordes and smashing everything in their path. Gurzag Ironskull and his lads were trapped in the mirrored city decades ago after an ill-fated looting spree amidst the ruins of Shadespire. Ironskull was initially furious, but in the years since he's grown rather fond of the place. After all, what self-respecting Orc would decline an endless cycle of violence and bloodshed? The Duarden, known as Fire Slayers, are fearless and intractable mercenary warriors. They will fight for anyone in exchange for your gold, the magical resource which fuels their great strength, and which they believe is the spiritual essence of their warrior god Grimnir. To a Fire Slayer, honor is paramount. Once an oath is given, it must be fulfilled, and to abandon one's word would be seen as an act of unthinkable disgrace. It is for this reason that the Fire Slayers of the Volstarg Lodge still bear the shame of their failure to protect Shadespire. Hundreds of warriors have fallen or been lost in the attempt to banish the curse that haunts the city, yet no Fire Slayer would ever suggest that the venture be abandoned. The legendary Rune Father, Fjul Grimnir, ventured into the ruins of Shadespire many years ago, and still walks the shadowed streets of the city's dark reflection with his loyal companions. Though he has made little progress during the decades he has spent in the Mirrored City, the redoubtable old fighter has not yet lost hope of restoring his people's treasured honor. The death rattle of Shadespire are quite unlike the typical charnel slaves raised by minor necromancers and practitioners of foul magic. Their soul animus remains trapped within their decayed forms as a result of the curse of Nagash, and thus they retain a fragmented memory of their past lives long after their flesh has rotted away. Over time, many of these unfortunates have sworn themselves to the God of Death's service, praying that by petitioning Nagash for forgiveness, they may be freed from the agony of their existence. Greatest among the faithful is the sepulchral warden, the former Lord Marshal of Shadespire. Such is his devotion to Nagash, that this enigmatic creature has been gifted with the power to inspire frenzied devotion in his subjects, and he directs them against all who would challenge the great necromancer's will. Skaven are a race of malicious and devious ratmen enthralled to chaos. Seemingly infinite in number, The swarms of great Skaven clans blight every corner of the realms, scampering forth from hidden lairs to enslave and prey upon the other mortal races. It is fortunate indeed that the rat folk are naturally treacherous creatures, constantly backstabbing and betraying one another in search of personal power. For if they were to unite in one cause, the clans would be all but unstoppable. Warlord Scritch Spiteclaw leads a particularly murderous and spiteful band through the mirrored city, searching for artifacts and trinkets to loot, and an escape route by which he can claw his way to freedom. The mirrored city of Shadespire is a nightmare plane of illusions and madness, an ever-changing labyrinth of endless stairs, cramped streets, and soaring archways. The original city is drained of all color and life, and for thousands of years it has rested as a foreboding ruin. Those unfortunate, brave, or foolhardy adventurers that set foot within its walls are drawn through the veil between realms and trapped within the mirrored city. For such wayward souls, all hope seems lost. Yet there are those who will not accept their fate without a fight. So, my ear's about worn out after that. But, if you was to just buy the Shadespire book and box set, let's say, and you was wanting to get fluff from that, you get about 2.5 pages worth of not very, decent, of some good stuff, but you get about 2.5 pages worth of fluff, and then a couple of little descriptions of the war bands and the war bands that's upcoming and all. But strangely and interestingly enough, where all the Shadespire lore is contained in a little booklet called Skirmish for Age of Sigmar. And actually, the bulk of the fluff in this book has to do with Shadespire. Shadespire's Curse, the Treasures of the Catafranes, the Haunting Grounds, and the most... Of course, we're going to get more fluff from this. This is only the first go-round for Shadespire. We haven't even got, the first. We just got the first 4 war bands. We're going to get some more fluff come down for it. But and the biggest thing that they fleshed out so far, of course, is the fluff for the Stormcast Eternals, the Golden Boys. So they're going to fluff that one out more. So there's a bigger, deeper tale so far for them. But the interesting thing I found out about that when I was delving deeper into it, you got this guy, Severin Steelheart, who's the leader of a Liberator squad that you had come with the box set. Then you got another feller who's a chicken rider, I reckon, or a vanguard, I believe. With the birds and all. And then, if you look, interestingly enough, in that little box, you'll hear tell of some other Stormcasts that was actually a leader. By the way this tells it, Severin Steelheart was a member of a war band that this other feller here, Knight Quester Cantor Gloryborn, he was the leader of this war band that Severin was a part of. So there must have been several, and it wasn't just telling the fluff. There are several Stormcast bands besides these 2 they're telling about. There were several bands that came in there, and according to this and the rest of the fluff, of course, there was multiple Stormcast bands sent into there. And according to this little box, Severin, he's just like a survivor. Him and them other 2 that come with a Shadespire is survivors of a bigger war band that was originally commanded by this Gloryborn feller. So anyway, that's about all I got on part 1. Be looking for part 2. And as always, please go down there and subscribe and click like if you want to, if you can. And be looking for the next videos. And we appreciate it.